Thanks for watching this presentation on authoring volumes, which basically means dealing with spatial references or references in space. In this presentation, I basically want to go through some of the complexity of authoring in XR that we found over the year to help us have a more productive and focused dialogue as to what kind of interactions different interfaces should support. The references in space will have certain attributes. That is a given. We don't know exactly what they will be or how they will be arrived at, but the floating things in space will at least know what they are to an extent. So we have spent some time looking at ways of dealing with this, and one of the ways was having lots of little volumes, small volumes in space, like framed shelves. We decided not to do that. We're only going to have two aspects to the space. One is the cube, which is a volume that you will be authoring into. We currently have a wrist menu on the left and right hand. The left one will toggle showing the environment, all the references, all the goodies in the space you're using to author. If you touch the new one on your right wrist, by right I mean your dominant hand. If you are left-handed, it will be opposite. You will toggle seeing this cube, which is your manuscript, what you're writing into, and hiding it. There are many options here for continuing what we did last year of the hand menu. We can have specific controls on the different fingers, which is very, very interesting, and it can even have subsections. So what is up here now is a very, very loose suggestion as to the space of opportunities for fingers. So if you tap on your right wrist, you hide that cube, and then we have the working space here. This is a really rough glance just to show you some of the ideas we can have for interface, like that could be a HUD, a head-up display, or glasses that change your view. That could be a way of dealing with it. You could literally touch your forehead to change it maybe. That could be virtual gadgets, or even virtual gloves. So you change gloves, and that means your hand menus do different things. You could have a floating control panel, which in the beginning didn't seem very sexy, but it could actually be very useful, like you're building up a bridge of a spaceship kind of a thing. You could have a tool belt where you pull things out of the tool belt to use in different ways. And because we've been talking about volumes a lot, we thought maybe a little cube you could twist around to change the view of the room could be useful. So in my 2D author, I have a map view, which many of you will know. And I've shown just two of the controls in there to give an indication of the complexity. And this is just in 2D, just basic stuff. So depending on how you interact with the information, you will see a lot of stuff or less. How we provide the interface for that will be one of our big challenges. A glossary is useful. A binder is the language we use to refer to a type of folder or set bound of documents, such as a journal or proceedings, etc. The point of this is if you have a huge knowledge base, you don't want necessarily 30 separate objects representing 30 separate papers from one proceedings. You probably want a way to have them separate or all together depending on what you are doing. The cube, to reiterate, is the manuscript, meaning it is the thing you're authoring into. It's your notepad, your sketchpad, your tablet. Knowledge object can be anything in the environment. It can be a snippet of video, 3D object, piece of code, LLM, all kinds of things. For our main work here, it is a reference to a PDF originally, since that's the world we're living in. And it should know as much about that as possible. And it should be viewable as a plain PDF, but it also should be viewable in more sophisticated ways, such as the kind of thing we are showing and working on how to author here. An annotation is something that the user, not the author of the original document, but the user has done to a knowledge object to say what they think it is, a bit of a summary. This is to build an annotated bibliography. It could be a mark, it could be writing, it could be various things, and depending on the situation, it could be many different types of writing about it. But the point is you have a knowledge object that the user/reader has stuck onto it, and that should then be usable in the space we're working on to extract and place that object. So the workspace is everything except the cube. That is the differentiation we're making. The cube The manuscript, what you're writing, has a separate set of controls from the world you're in. Otherwise, to me at least, it gets way too complicated. We don't need to go through all of these, but the complexities of dealing with the environment are quite huge. So for instance, under space management, how you will change the workspace. For instance, you are looking at 3 sets of proceedings. How do you select them to say you want them to be listed by name or title, or by timeline by when the documents were produced, or timelines by when the authors were alive or listed alphabetically by the authors? You could also be looking at timelines by dates inside the documents, or a map, physical map, knowledge map, and so on. These are the kind of workspaces we need to decide on interactions for how to toggle between them, or maybe even have subsets. Then there are global layout options. Once you're in a workspace, you need to set the direction maybe from where the timeline should go, what meanings color should have, appearance of objects. Maybe you want to see tiny PDFs in space. Maybe you want to see tiny dots if you have a lot, and what the dot shape or color would mean, presentation styles, and so on. And as I've experimented with a lot in author, showing and hiding based on criteria such as all authors or by the text of the title or dates will be very important in order to enable the end user to have a space that is manageable. Similar to show hide is selections. Should be able to do group selections, which is not that easy in WebXR, but Fabian may have an idea. Of course, you should be able to select things individually by literally pinching them in space. And of course, by categories such as we have in author, by selecting all the people, the documents or knowledge objects with annotations, and so on. Then we have a relationship management section of once you select several objects, does that mean they should show how they are related like they do in author, or should that require further interaction so it doesn't get messy? How should the connections be displayed? Should it be incoming and outgoing? Should it be based on the title? How much of the metadata should be used, or the attribute should be used for that? Should you be able to save sets of documents into a new binding for this? Should you maybe hide based on what you've selected? And then of course you have similar situations of aligning and distributing what you have. You can't just have clusters. Sometimes you will need a list because they are skimmable and easily groupable, sometimes not. And then following link connections. The easy thing is you click, so to speak, on a link and it opens an entirely new world. If you do that on a web page, it's kind of okay, and we all know that you can command click to open it in a new tab, kind of hiding the other one. In XR, you're dealing with a full environment, so maybe you also want the thing that you're opening to open into the current workspace that you are watching now. What would that mean? How would it show up? How would it be framed? How would it be interacting with the rest of the workspace? These are issues that could become quite real. And then finally, when it comes to binder of folder management, journal proceedings, and so on, like we talked about, you should be able to fold and unfold them, as in open them up and close them, so that you have a representative icon or text or image or whatever it might be that you can see the insides of. When you open, should it be a list or a map? And how can you show and hide the title binder if you have all the documents open? Do you want to have the binder document while you see the things inside or not? And then there is the issue of in a knowledge map, like you saw earlier, the connections that appear. Should the connections only work on the top item, like the proceedings and its keywords, or should it work on things that are inside? If it works on things that are inside, should they pop out if there is something else that links to it? These are exciting opportunities that will need to be worked on, but they're not simple. And then we move over to the cube. The cube has 6 sides plus as many non-Euclidean sides as we want. So we could do something like having a linear view that once this cube is published from manuscript to being someone else's source, there's this linear introduction maybe. One side could be a list of references. You could have timeline and so on. And then we need to look at interactions that are basic. For instance, how do you rotate it? Should it be billboarded so that it snaps around, or should we be able to completely free-handed do it. With current hand tracking, in my experience, that can get a bit messy, but we need to experiment with it. And then there's the unfolding and folding. What does that even mean? The idea with that notion is that, let's say you have a map on one of the sides. It's tiny. Should you make the cube go large to see it, or should you be able to somehow pull it out, explode it into the environment? As you see here, my terminology is confusing because I don't know either the answers to this. But the point is, this cube shouldn't just be a small cube when someone is reading it later. Talking of reading it later, what are the things you can put into it and how when you are adding items? Should you be able to import a full workspace from the environment into one of the sides? Maybe. If so, how? How to add text? Is it a matter of touching something and having a keyboard shortcut, or speech to text? Maybe. How to add other media? Should you have 3D models sticking out from it? Should it be internal? Should it be hidden? And then you may want to have specific states of this folding, unfolding, and pulled out, all these exciting things. How do you save them? What is the interface for that interaction? And where can the user find them later on? These are very interesting questions. Then there's the question of sculpting this, because this is a volume. How do you position objects in the linear kind of introduction side, if we're even going to have that? Is it like a normal word processor moving things? Maybe. And how do you position things in the map of the volume that may be only on one side or maybe all encompassing? We will also equally have issues with connecting. How do we follow the connections? If we consider the future having these types of cubes as being what people are reading and not PDFs, then we have the question of, if you follow a link from one to another, link or citation, does it open into the space or does it replace the cube? How do we cite the cube? If we cite the cube, do we cite it as one object, or do we cite it with a specific view or a view spec? And talking of views and view specs, how do we choose what should be on each side? How do we customize within those, very similar to the environments we talked about? Then how do you save and retrieve such views? So these are some sketches, some very, very early questions of trying to show some of the complexity of the interface. So we can look at this guy here with the goggles and the belt with a little cube and the 2 wrist menus, looking at an environment where he has a list, kind of a timeline maybe, knowledge map, and maybe that can help us think a little bit of what this environment might be. So thank you for looking. I hope I highlighted some questions that maybe will stimulate some kind of new answers. Thank you.